Welcome to the audience and to the listeners we have on the stream. We start now with the sixth group in the program of young researchers at Dokkhuset. Tonight we have 5 guests who will give us different perspectives on the big challenge, how to combat marine plastic pollution. Plastic is everywhere, in all the world's oceans, from the surface to the bottom, and plastic is the biggest threat to the ocean systems on which humans are completely dependent. What consequences does plastic have for plants, for wildlife, for microbes in the oceans? What is happening to life on the seabed, beaches, and the coastline? How do researchers work, and what can they suggest for solutions? In the MAPLE project this evening, you will meet researchers from many disciplines such as biology, geography, geophysics, and sustainability. They work together with engineers to get an overview and map the challenges or connections within marine plastic pollution in the Trondheimsfjord and in the coast in central Norway. Knowledge is the key to find effective solutions in the short and the long term for the ocean and the ecosystem. But first, I will introduce Rannveig Tellemann Storeng, who will put the sustainability research program in a broader context. She is Director of Division for Research, Innovation and External Relations at NTNU. Please, Rannveig.
Thank you, Randi Wenche, and thank you to both you and Stig Larsæter for the hard work you have invested in giving us all this wonderful opportunity to learn more about how to combat marine plastic pollution. Welcome to this evening where young and aspiring researchers will share their knowledge and research on topics that are of great importance to all of us and our global community. The consequences of climate change are no longer a distant threat. We are experiencing the severe consequences daily. At NTNU, many researchers from various departments and disciplines are working hard to find sustainable solutions. In 2021, we established a strategic research initiative called Sustainability Research at NTNU, or SusRes, where 47 young researchers work in 11 interdisciplinary projects, and these projects all address transformative changes needed to achieve a sustainable society. So we are very proud of our young researchers at NTNU, and tonight you will meet some of them. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to welcome you to this evening, where you will hear from our passionate and talented scientists as they present important results from their projects.
Thank you, Rannveig. There will be 5 researchers from one of these 11 projects, and they work with plastic pollution. And we will have an intermission of 10 minutes after the lectures, and after that we will have a discussion with questions also from the audience. Francesca Verones is developing new methods to calculate and assess how human activities impact ecosystems and biodiversity, both in oceans and on land. In addition to leading the MAPLE project, which is the name of this project, she is involved in several large international research projects. Francesca is also the leading author of the report of biodiversity and business from UN's Nature Panel. This is a work going on in 2023 to 2026. She's a professor in the Industrial Ecology program at NTNU. Welcome to stage, Francesca.
Yeah, thank you very much and for coming. So I'm going to talk about plastic today. So Maple is all about marine plastic with a special focus on Norway. But let me start with the very basics. What is plastics? So plastics is a material that is made by humans, mostly from fossil fuels, coal, gas and the like, various substances that are added. So you're heating this up a lot. You add other substances which are called additives to give it different properties, different colors, for example, as well. And then you can ultimately create the plastic products. And most of the plastic products that we use today are really made from non-renewable fossil sources. And there's only basically natural rubber that is used to some extent as a natural source. So what kind of things are then made of plastic? So I mean, if you just look around you, I'm sure you all spot a lot of different things that are actually made of plastic. That includes clothes to some extent, bottles, you know, the pointer here. I mean, there's many, many different things that are made of plastic. And then, you know, other things, of course, many, many toys, packaging of all sorts and dimensions, but also very important things like safety belts, seat belts, helmets, and things, for example, like prosthetic arms or legs. So plastic can be very important. It can be a very, very useful material. But the problem is that we're using far too much of this material and in ways where they're not really useful. In Norway alone, we use 900,000 tons of plastic every year. And the 7 biggest sectors of plastic use are packaging, household items, fisheries and aquaculture, electronic and electrical appliances, construction, cars, and textiles. What's the problem with all of this plastic then? The problem is that we have very large amounts of plastic that are used worldwide. And a large part of these huge amounts don't get properly recycled or incinerated, but a large part is dumped somewhere or is littered, and then it can reach the environment and ultimately then often is reaching the ocean as sort of the final sink. It's estimated that today there's over 165 million tons of plastic in the ocean already, and every year there's 25 million tons of plastic that are added to the oceans from worldwide plastic consumption. Another big problem with plastic use is that it's taking a really, really, really long time for plastic to break down. If you see here different items and how long they are taking to degrade, then you see that the easiest thing to decompose takes at least 10 years, 10 to 20 years. Estimates are up to 600 years for certain types of plastic. So it takes a really, really long time. And in addition, many plastic items are floating, which means that they can sort of be transported worldwide through the whole ocean once they are actually entering that system. And if you look at this map of the major ocean currents, you see that there are areas where it is essentially forming circles. And that's where there are these so-called gyres. That's exactly where the plastic is accumulating in the world's oceans. So these are regions that are also called these garbage patches. So one thing that we need to understand is how plastic is moving in the ocean. And that's not just for the global ocean, but also for the Trondheimsfjord. And that is what one of the Maple PhD students is working on. The largest of these garbage patches, that's the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. That one is approximately 1.7 million square kilometers in size. And since that's a very, very big number and hard to imagine, just for comparison, that's about 4.6 times the size of Norway. So this is an area that is covered with plastic. There's billions of pieces of plastic, small and large. And it's this magnitude that makes plastic to one of the worst problems that the oceans is facing today. In addition to this large amount comes the issue, as I mentioned, that it takes a long time to break down, to fragment. But the problem with this fragmentation is that larger pieces get into smaller pieces, so it's getting more and more pieces, billions and billions. And of course, there's also microplastics that can be emitted directly, and some of them can also be toxic. Now, if you're on a beach somewhere, it can often look like this. So you're looking down and suddenly, oh, there's pink sand and green sand, but it's not actually sand, it's microplastics. So this is a picture that I took on a beach in Hawaii. I was working in Hawaii at the Center for Marine Debris Research for 2 months. Hawaii is at the edge of this great Pacific garbage patch. So you find lots and lots of things that are sort of transported there from this garbage patch, like all sorts of different sort of like packaging items. This black thing here is an eel trap, which is perfect as a muzzle for monk seals that they don't get off anymore. We also found lots and lots of different toys in all sorts of states of decomposition, and lots of microplastics. So there was more microplastic in the beaches than seashells. So my daughter decided to decorate her mermaid sand tail with plastics instead of seashells. We also found lots of stuff that had been in the ocean for quite a while, it seems, so there's species growing on it even. And this is also something we need to understand. How do biota interact with this plastic? And this is also one of the topics that is the focus of one of the PhD students in Maple. Now, if we're looking a little bit at how plastic is actually affecting marine life, there's many different ways, but 2 very important ways is ingestion and entanglement. Now, entanglement very classically is fishing line that is entangling animals and usually leads to death, immediate death. But as you see, there's also other things that can lead to entanglement. Basically, anything that can form a circle around the species can lead to an entanglement effect and can then lead to sort of like chronic impacts where species just can't get out anymore. Now, when we were in Hawaii, we met this turtle here, and as you see, this one is missing 1 flipper. We of course don't know exactly what happened, but it's very likely that this had an interaction with fishing line, and it ripped itself free because it was quite a big one, and then this fishing line tightened around the flipper, which means the blood circulation is cut off, and the turtle eventually loses the flipper. Now, you could say this is actually a lucky turtle because it survived. And this is a green turtle, so it eats seagrass and the like, so it can actually survive. It doesn't need to hunt. But that just shows one of the effects of, chronic effects of entanglement. The other impact I mentioned, ingestion, that's when species eat plastic and can have very different effects. They can actually starve because they eat all the plastic, but there are no nutrients in the plastic, so they starve with a full stomach. Or all these plastic objects can lead to internal injuries, internal bleeding, and then death. Eating lots of plastic bags can cause, in species like turtles, also problems with the buoyancy. So they're getting too light. They can't dive down anymore, really, because they have, the buoyancy is affected. And then many species also have different kinds of favorite foods. And for turtles, for example, I don't know if you know what many different turtles have as a favorite food. It's jellyfish. And if you see this picture, if you imagine for a second that you are a turtle, this is in the harbor of Honolulu, you see a plastic bag and you see a jellyfish. For a turtle, this looks exactly the same. It will not be able to distinguish this. So to solve this plastic crisis that we have, we need to understand how plastic is moving in the environment, how it's interacting with biota, where it accumulates, and what pathways we have to actually mitigate this problem. And that's exactly what the Maple project is about. And I'm very happy to now give the floor to the 4 PhD students to tell us about their work, with a special focus on Norway.
Thank you, Francesca. Then I will introduce the first one of the PhD candidates, Jenny Mørk. She's researching on the concerns how plastic particles are transported in the ocean and in coastal areas. To understand the environmental impacts of marine plastic pollution, we need to know more about where the plastic in our fjords and ocean are ending up. This knowledge can also help us understand how and where to focus mitigation measures and cleanup in, for example, the Trondheimsfjord. Jenny is a PhD at the Department of Physics at NTNU. Please, Jenny.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. Sorry. I'm going to talk about transport modeling and how that can be used in the context of marine plastic pollution. But before we get into that, I want to tell you a little story. So I want you to imagine this scenario. It's a nice day and you've decided to spend it at the beach. And on your way there, you stop by a grocery store and you buy yourself something to drink. That drink comes in a plastic bottle, like this one. So you take your drink to the beach, but when you go home, you leave the empty bottle behind. And sooner or later, that bottle is going to end up in the ocean. Now the question is, what happens next? And depending on where we are in the world, there are many different things that can happen. One example is this. So for those of you who don't understand Norwegian or don't remember this, this is a news story about the so-called plastic whale, or plasthvalen in Norwegian, which is the name that was given to a whale that turned up outside of Bergen a few years ago. So this whale was very sick, so it was put down, and when they opened its stomach, they found out that the reason it was so sick was most likely because its stomach was full of plastic. And this is just one incident, but as you heard from Francesca, a lot of species actually have a hard time telling plastic from food, so unfortunately, it's not that unlikely that this bottle, if it ends up in the ocean, will one day end up in the stomach of an animal. And even if that doesn't happen, then this definitely will. Because from the minute that the bottle enters the environment, it starts degrading. And in that process, it releases toxic chemicals and these tiny plastic fragments that are called microplastics. And microplastics have this amazing ability to end up absolutely everywhere. So before we know it, there are fragments from this bottle in the fish that we eat and even in our drinking water. And it doesn't even stop there, because in the recent years, microplastics has been found in our blood, in placentas, in both human and dog testicles, in breast milk, and deep inside our lungs. So the point is that marine plastic pollution is a serious problem, and it has consequences reaching far beyond just life in the ocean. So the next question then is, what can we do to prevent all of this? And obviously we need to stop polluting. We need to make sure that the plastic doesn't end up in the ocean in the first place. But even if we were able to completely stop all pollution today, there's already so much plastic in the oceans that we would still feel the consequences of it for probably hundreds of years into the future. So we also need to try to clean up as much as possible of the plastic in the oceans. But if we're going to do that, then we also need to know where we can find it. So say, for example, that I wanted to map out the distribution of plastic pollution in Trondheimsfjord, which is actually one of the goals of my PhD project. And what I could do is I could just get out on a boat and I could travel around and I could just take notes of all the plastic that I find. Maybe that would look something like this. And that looks pretty good, but there are a few problems. One of the problems is that tomorrow, maybe it looks like this. And I wouldn't know because I only checked today. So the next question then is, how can I find out how this distribution changes over time without having to actually go out and check every day? And the answer is transport modeling. So transport modeling is a tool that allows us to actually map out how pollutants like plastic are transported and where they end up without ever really having to leave the office. So this is me when I'm at work. I don't go into the field at all. I just sit in front of my computer and I try to describe what happens to the plastic mathematically. And in very simple terms, that looks something like this. So what I do is I take data about things like ocean currents and waves, wind, and properties of the plastic itself, and I combine that with a transport equation that tells me how the object will move. So when I run a simulation, what I essentially do is I get my computer to solve this equation over and over and over again as the data changes with time and with the particle position. And what I end up with is a trajectory, showing me how the object is moving. So again, with my goal of mapping out the distribution of plastic pollution in Trondheimsfjord, what I can do is I can run simulations for thousands of particles at a time over a longer period of time. And the result that I end up with might look something like this. So all the lines that you see here are individual particle trajectories. And what I now have is a map that's showing me how plastic in the fjord is moving. And this is pretty useful in itself, because I can just look at this map and I can see where a lot of plastic is going to accumulate, which is very useful if I'm going to go pick it up. But it's even more useful if I show it to someone else, for example, a marine biologist, because they can add some more information to it. For example, they can add some information about the habitats of marine wildlife or some vulnerable ecosystems. Maybe that would look something like this. And I just want to emphasize here that I am not a marine biologist, so most of this is just something that I made up as an illustration. But I do know that there are several protected areas in Trondheimsfjord. For example, we have Tauteryggen, which is around here. It's this subsea ridge between Frosta and Leksvik. And it's the home of many different species, both animals and plants, and even corals, actually. So once I have information like this, this map not only shows me where I should go if I want to clean up plastic, but it also shows me where I should go first. Because if I see here that a lot of plastic is accumulating in a vulnerable area, then I know that I should prioritize cleanups in that area if I want to minimize the environmental impact of the pollution. And that's exactly what I think is so cool about transport modeling, because if we do this, if we combine it with knowledge from other relevant fields, then we can actually estimate the environmental impact of the pollution while at the same time learning where we need to focus our efforts to minimize it. And with that, I want to say thank you for your attention and pass the word on to the others who are going to talk more about the environmental impact.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Exciting and interesting research. Gabrielle Heberli is researching on what happens when organisms adapt to plastic in their living environments. She looks at how microbes colonize pieces of plastic and how this affects both these micro-communities and how the plastic itself is affected by microbial activity. This insight will be used to bring forth new understanding on the long-term consequences of ocean pollution and also how nature finds ways to reduce or resist the threats from our plastic waste. Gabrielle is doing her PhD at the Department of Biology. Please, Gabrielle.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here tonight. My name is Gabby, and as a part of the MAPLE project, I am to understand the biological impact of marine plastic pollution. So I want to go back to Jenny's example of a plastic bottle that found its way into the ocean. As we've seen, this bottle will travel around due to different currents and due to the physical dynamics of the ocean. In my work, I'm interested in looking at how this bottle will be influenced by the biological characteristics of the sea and vice versa. So we all know that the ocean is full of life, a lot of life that we can see, but interestingly enough, also a lot of life that we cannot see. For example, in a single drop of seawater, we can account for billions of tiny, tiny organisms that we call microbes. Those include plankton, for example, microalgae or copepods, which are the base of our food chains. We also find bacteria, also marine fungi, and also tiny viruses. Here are some examples of microbes that we can find. Now, these microbes are essential to keeping our ecosystems healthy. They contribute by recycling nutrients, by absorbing CO2, and also by producing more than 50% of all the oxygen we breathe. So, in short, those marine microbes are essential to making this Earth here livable for us. Now, going back to our plastic bottle, now that we know that the ocean is full of an immense amount of life, if we find an object floating, or if we immerse an object, it will immediately be colonized by millions and millions of organisms. First, by microbes, smaller organisms, and later on will come bigger organisms. You might have some experience with this if you own a boat that you have to clean up every couple times a year, or if you left fishing materials a bit too long in the water. And this might look something a bit like this. Well, in my research, I don't work with plastic bottles, but I work with plastic coupons that I put in the water, and every couple months or regularly, I check what is growing on them. So here we can already see quite a diversity of organisms. We have a sea star, we have some blue mussels. Here we have some quite big tunicates that probably have attached to the plastic as juveniles or larvae, and then kept on growing attached. Wait. Sorry. And here we have also some smaller ascidians that form the colony. Now, this is already very interesting, but in my project, I'm specifically interested at what happens to the microscopic scale. So what happens if we zoom in? Well, turns out quite a lot. This here is a microscopic image of what we call a microbial mat, or a biofilm. So here we see the biofilm from the top. So we have this colony of different kinds of organisms glued together by a biological glue that allows them to survive the harsh condition of the ocean, but also colonize the entirety of the plastic. Now, if we keep zooming in, we can see that they form a three-dimensional structure. So this microbial organization already hints towards the fact that this colonization process is not entirely random. And if we zoom even more, we can even start to recognize some organisms. Here in red, for example, we have very distinguishable microalgae called diatoms. So in my research, I'm interested in looking at the trends and dynamics of plastic colonization. So the first question I want to ask is, who lives in there? So what kind of organisms are colonizing my plastics? So as you can imagine, it would be quite a pain to just look at microscopic images and try to recognize and count all those organisms. So instead, I use DNA. Sorry, I'm struggling a bit with this. Yes. So DNA is a very big molecule that is present in every cell, in every living thing. And it's also called the code of life, because it encodes for everything that we are. It makes us unique in our individuality, while still making us similar enough to be a part of the same species. So this is because, through evolution, DNA has kept some very conserved regions that makes us all apart, and me included, to the human species, but also has some very variable region who may be a woman with blue eyes and brown hair. Now, what does that mean for my microbial community? Well, if I take the DNA from my microbial community and focus on very specific conserved regions that I will call a barcode, I can compare this barcode to existing databases that will assign this barcode to a specific organism. Now, for example, I can take my drop of water and I can target specific barcodes for bacteria, algae, and fungi. And this will give me a profile, community profile for those organisms. I can do the same for my community on the plastic, and I would expect to see quite different community profiles, because in water, we find organisms that like living free-floating, and in plastic, we'll have organisms that like to live attached. Now, this is already quite understood in the scientific community, those differences. What is not is what is driving those plastic communities. What is influencing them to make them as they are? Well, in my research, I'm trying to understand it by analyzing different communities. For example, how they change through seasons. Because we know that microbial communities are very dynamic, and they also are affected a lot by their environment. But what happens if I also change the substrate? So if I change the plastic, will my community change, knowing that plastic, different kinds of plastic, have very different chemical compositions? So understanding this dynamic is what I'm trying to uncover, because specificity of this community means that we are creating a new ecosystem. And as plastic becomes to become more and more present in the seawater, this ecosystem is also growing. And we need to understand this to know how this is impacting vital microbial processes already existing in the sea. So to go further than colonization, I'm also asking the question, what are they actually doing on this plastic? Well, if I take a plastic piece and I put it in the water, the base case scenario would be that I have a random colonization by specific microbes that are just catching the plastic to have a ride. So they will just float around, as Jenny has mentioned, floating through the globe and just chilling. Well, this is not necessarily unproblematic, because if this community or if we find individuals in this community that is invasive species, or if they carry antibiotic-resistant genes, that would mean that they will be transferred through the entirety of the globe. Now, another possibility is that microbes are actually interacting with the plastic in itself, for example, using the carbon of the plastic as an energy source. That would mean that there is biodegradation. Biodegradation. Now, this is a very trendy topic. It's not staying. Well, biodegradation is a very trendy topic, and it would be great for us, because that means that we don't need to care about the plastic in the ocean. Well, that is not exactly true. Biodegradation studies are still in their infancy. From what we found is that biodegradation rates are still very low and slow. So for this reason, I believe that reducing and stopping the input of plastics in the environment already should remain a priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Jakob Syvin examines plastics in coastal soil. For example, microplastics found along the coast of Trøndelag. How does the plastic affect the soil on the site? Is microplastic leaking into the sea? It is a challenge to collect samples of often fragmented and fragile plastic buried down in the soil. Another challenge is to obtain cross-sections without contamination. Jakob has developed methods for extracting soil profiles that give a good picture of the status of plastic waste that has been accumulated over a long period of time. One aim of the research is to provide policy-relevant advice on how we should deal with the plastic effects on local soil resources. Jakob takes his PhD at the Department of Geography at NTNU. Please, Jakob.
Hi, and thank you. Is it on? Hi, and thank you for coming, and thank you for the introduction. As Randi introduced, I am moving on land. We have now heard about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in the introduction. We have heard about the transport modeling. But for some plastic, as we know, there is not enough to model where it ends and pick it up, because it has already been there for quite a while. Some years ago, a colleague called me and said, Jakob, it is a lot of sound where I'm walking. And we went out where she was, and we got this sound for every step we had walking around on Smøla and on Frøya. And it seems dramatic, but for those of you who have been working in walking in the coastal zone there, it is true. And we thought, okay, how much plastic is it there? It was quite obvious that it was bottles, and how could we look at this plastic. And most important, what should we do with this plastic? Is it a big problem? Is this just a local problem? And if it's a big problem, if it's along the whole coastline, how should we deal with it? Because it was, like Gabi said, the best would be to mitigate, to stop the production, not all plastic, but like really reduce the plastic consumption. But what should we do with the plastic that is already there? So let's start digging. That was my first thought. We could dig down here. But it's not easy to dig in this. I hit one of my first samples, I hit a rope that was this thick, and I had to use a saw to get through. That produces microplastic. And I wanted to look at the microplastic with a master student. It was more or less impossible, because I'd probably produced billions of microplastic just by getting through the rope. What am I really measuring then? I'm measuring my sawing, not the soils. So, for my PhD, I wondered then about how water is acting when it hits these soils. It must have an influence, was my thought, as it's a plastic soil. It's not a natural soil. And just to give an impression, this is not hot spots in some few areas. It's all the wrack base along the west coast of Smøla, Hitra, Frøya, and I'm sure also northwards and southwards towards Bergen. So I thought, okay, maybe it's better methods, so time to drill. I used a petrol drill for ice and mounted like coring head for concrete and grinded that one. And then we could make what became quite beautiful cores. And then I could bring these ones back to the lab and have a look at them. So what I wanted to do then was a quite simple setup, because we need data on this on global scale. We need methods that is applicable also for low-income countries, for citizen science projects, so we don't use methods that is so expensive that we can just do it here at NTNU, but we need data on this. It's very few studies. So I poured water on top, and I measured how much time does it take before it leaves the sample. The problem is that this is natural samples. As you see, there are plastic items, but there are also a lot of different concentrations of clay or organic matter, of grass, etc., etc., and I couldn't bring hundreds of these samples back to the lab, because I would need that to get really good data. So I thought, okay, let's try to make a more controlled setup. So then, soil from plantation, some manual mixing, adding plastic pieces from plastic bottles, again, having water on top for 24 hours, and see how long time does it take for these to leave for every minute. And to jump very clearly to my so far results, little plastic, by little plastic I mean some percentage of plastic, down to 0.5%, doesn't say much, but let's say 30 small pieces per soil tube reduced the speed of infiltration. It clearly changed the properties of the plastic. And then a lot of plastic, like the pictures I introduced with, from the natural soils, clearly increase the speed of water infiltration. And this means it's changing the properties of the soil. It's probably changing the runoff possibilities. And in some areas, it becomes wetter. In other areas, it becomes drier. So the conclusion there, it's not a natural soil anymore. So we could say, so what? As we have heard, plastic is fantastic. Use it every day. Try to go one day without use of plastic. You won't get anywhere out of bed. Probably not in bed. And then the problem is that it's everywhere, as we have heard from several of the other speakers. We could say that it is a plasticine. We have a plastic soil in huge areas. It changes makes wetlands or drylands. And also, what I want to look more into is the leakage back to the ocean. Because these soils, we have thought about these areas as the sink of plastic, but it's obvious that when it's so much plastic there, it's also leaking back. And then I come down to my final point, and also the motivation for doing this to me is, how should we manage this? Should we just leave it out there? If you go out on the coast and speak with people and say, okay, I think we just should leave the plastic that is in the soil there. It's mixed feedback, naturally. But maybe the other version is to use helicopters and bring digging machines out there and take it out. And where should we put it? Should we burn it? This is super complicated, and we definitely need more research into the biological part. How is this affecting, like, how is the water and the biological changes affected by this plastic in these areas? So then we are actually back to the more philosophical question, what is nature? Because should we leave it as pristine or polluted? I think this is a big discussion that brings up totally other fields. So thank you very much. And yeah, I'm looking forward to discussion around this afterwards.
Thank you, Jakob. We have the last PhD candidate, Ahmed Maroon, is doing research on consumption patterns related to plastic products and the environmental impacts of plastic pollution. He uses quantitative system analysis and models to better understand the plastic cycle in society and how plastic leaks into the environment. Some of his methods in this project are material flow analysis and life cycle analysis. The aim is to provide science-based policy recommendations to limit the effect of plastic consumption and thus achieve a more sustainable society. Ahmed is taking his PhD at the Industrial Ecology Program, NTNU. Please, Ahmed.
Thank you, Randi Wenche, and good evening, everyone. Yeah. Do you know how many plastic bottles are produced and consumed in Norway every single year? Do you know how many of these get collected and get recycled? How about those that get mismanaged and reach the environment? How many animals or species die because of this plastic bottle? What can we actually do to solve the issue of plastic pollution? In this presentation, I'm going to address these few questions, which are actually part of my PhD. And just like any other problem in life, if we want to solve the issue of plastic pollution, we first need to understand it. And by understanding it, I mean, we should go ahead and take a look at the life story of a plastic bottle. Today, plastics are produced mostly from fossil hydrocarbons, as Francesca mentioned earlier. This plastic bottle will also be produced from that. It is then filled with water, for example, get consumed in society, and in an ideal situation, it would be collected and then get treated in many different ways. But this plastic bottle can be mismanaged and reach the environment. Plastics are extremely lightweight as for their density, and because of that, they get carried by winds. They can reach a river, and eventually, they would reach the ocean. But it does not stop here. This plastic bottle is going to be responsible for many different physical interactions in the ocean. For example, the plastic bottle can get to one ecosystem, where animals or species can actually jump on it. And because of the continuous ocean circulation, this plastic bottle is now in another ecosystem. These species that are newly introduced will actually kill the native populations, will cause a biodiversity decline. The plastic bottle can also harm and damage coral habitats. It can also entrap animals inside of it, which will affect their growth. Animals can also mistake it as food. They eat it, and they die. What I have just described to you is called the plastic cycle and its environmental impacts. If we want to find solutions to solve the issue of plastic pollution, we need to understand and also quantify both and also establish a link between both. But this is not easy, because plastics, it's not only the plastic bottle that we are caring about or concerned about. Plastics are used in many different application sectors and products in society. And because of that, they have different lifetimes. They also release plastics in different mechanisms and ways. Chemically speaking, plastics are extremely diverse. They contain many different chemicals that make them the way they are and gives them properties. These chemicals, or many of them, are actually toxic, or also are under-regulated, or even we don't have an idea about. They're understudied. In my PhD, there's also animals that eat plastics, but others don't eat plastic. In my PhD, I used data that describe the economic activities of humans, and also data that describe the environmental processes or phenomena. I describe them in mathematical equations, and I use methods such as material flow analysis, life cycle assessment, or machine learning. I use all of that to build models that can mimic reality. In my research, I have found out that there is around 600,000 tons of plastic that get wasted every year from the Norwegian economy. They get treated in many different ways. The majority is burned, as you can see, and around 25% get recycled or reused. Only 2% of the plastic that get wasted gets released to the environment. This may sound as very good news. The Norwegian plastic system is extremely efficient at retaining plastics from reaching the environment. But if we translate these 2% into absolute numbers, this shows a completely different picture. It is around 1.5 billion plastic bottles that reach the ocean every year. And to make it even worse, alongside these plastics, a wide range of chemical substances that have shown to be toxic to humans and biota are also leaching with plastics. I have also identified the main sources of pollution for Norway. They are mainly consumer packaging items, such as the plastic bottle or a bag, microplastics from tires, and fishing gear. So the question now, what can we do to limit the release of these plastics and solve the issue of plastic pollution? There are four main things I have identified in my research to be prioritized. We first need to reduce our consumption of plastics and also production. There's no way around it. We need to use alternative ways of transportation. We also need to regulate and pay attention to the additives and chemicals that are added to plastics. We also need to find alternative materials to replace plastics. I also developed models that quantify the environmental impacts when species eat plastics. This map over here shows the global hotspots of impacts for one whale, animal, or species. I also do that for other species groups, such as sea turtles or seabirds. And when I combine all of these impacts for all these animals, I can get a global hotspots of impacts on biodiversity. Using that, I can then say how many animals or species would die, for example, if we mismanage 1 kilogram of plastics. I have shown how to quantify the plastic cycle and its environmental impacts, but I yet need to establish a link between them. And by that, I mean we should take a look at the plastic cycle that is now and quantify its environmental impacts. And also, whatever scenario we plan to do. I can do that using life cycle assessment and take into account the impacts that I have shown, one of them, for example, the ingestion. And in order to avoid problem shifting, we should also include other impact pathways, such as climate change, water use, or land use. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ahmed. Now there will be an intermission of 10 minutes, and we gather again here with all the participants on the stage, and then we will have a discussion and Q&A and a deeper dive into this topic. Please. Hello, everyone. Hello. We will start again. The 10 minutes is past. So I will ask the participants to come to the stage. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, now we have heard. Yeah, is this entertainment or infotainment or what will we call it? Because it's very serious topics we have heard of, and but on the other hand, it's also engaging. Very inspiring, I think, to listen to you, and good communicators. So I guess that you will come with good questions from the audience. But as a start, I would like to give a few questions. There has been a lot of Gabriel, the bacteria and the microbes you were talking about. I read just now an article that researchers are able to use bacteria to eat the plastic, and they had succeeded to manipulate the DNA, so now they could eat 6 times faster than they did for just half a year or something. Is this something you heard about, or what do you think about this?
So yes, I did read about this. The one thing that I'm kind of looking when I read those articles, because a lot of bacteria and fungi and other organisms have been found to be able to degrade plastic. But when we read the actual research, we don't look at how the microbe or the organisms is eating the plastic, but how the plastic reacts to the presence of the microbes. So meaning that maybe the microbe is just breaking down the plastic and delivering it again to the environment. So I think there's still a need to more research to understand where does the plastic actually go, and is it actually consumed by the bacteria or the fungi, or is it just making smaller and smaller pieces that we'll find later in the environment?
So it can also be damaging even more.
Well, that's possibly.
Yeah, possibly. So the answer is not yet found.
Is my understanding, yes.
Francesca, you have been in this field for many years already and have the overall view. What is your comment to this research and with the biological and the bacteria idea of helping us solving the plastic pollution?
I mean, same as
Gabriel. Yeah.
I mean, if that would really work, if they could really break it down and then it's really just CO2 and nothing else, that would be really, really cool. But I think we're quite a long way from that. And in addition, the issue is, of course, also that plastic that is in the environment, it's not pristine plastic. It's not just PET or whatever. It's not just a hydrocarbon. It has additives in it. Yeah. And these additives are also what are toxic. And they would still be in the environment. So the toxic impacts, they're still there, even if the plastic is decomposed. And we don't know how that will interact with the biota as well.
So there is no quick fix. No. Ahmed?
I have a small comment
please.
to the topic. I think when it comes to is it going to help us or not, the question is how fast is this degradation actually is? Is it fast enough to hope that this plastic that we release to the ocean is going to be removed in a few years, or what is it actually? And then maybe they actually degrade it into carbon, and then it's going to cause cause ocean acidification. So that's also not good in another way. So we shouldn't have hope for that, I would say. It's not the solution. We should think about how we actually use and reduce this material.
And Jenny, you gave us a lesson about the transportation of plastic, and that was, of course, the simple story. It's a complex. Many powers are working with the plastic from every second, every minute. But how far are we, for example, with Trondheimsfjord? You showed us the map that you could get from your models. Is it this reality? You also mentioned the areas in the water where a specific diversity for birds. We have these Ramsar areas which are specially protected. Is it now something that we could use for hotspots and go out and try to collect the plastic and get it out of the ocean? Or is it at this stage more theoretical?
I think that the models that exist today, they are pretty good in like the global oceans. But things get a lot more complex in coastal regions and fjords because there's a lot of coastlines and maybe islands and things like that. And that really complicates things because a piece of plastic might be washed up on land, and then what happens? It might be washed out, it might stay there, might end up in the sediments, as Jakob was talking about, and we really don't know enough about this. So I would say that in coastal regions, more research is needed before we can actually say that these models are... I kind of want to avoid using the word trustworthy here because it makes it sound like what I'm doing it doesn't make sense at all, but I'm actually focusing on this this part with the beaching and the resuspension of plastics and trying to make that more realistic so that we can actually use these models also in coastal regions and in fjords. But there's also one problem that a lot of plastic also sinks, and a bottle, even though it's floating when it's whole, once it starts degrading, maybe it fills up with water, its buoyancy changes, so maybe it sinks, and we can't really, it can be really difficult to check or verify the models with plastic that is sinking, because as you may know, the oceans can be quite deep. So yeah, we don't really know what happens if they sink to the bottom necessarily, so it's complicated, but I mean, I'm positive. I think that we can, at least in the future, use this as a predictive tool.
Mm. But one message we all, being in this room to this evening, we have understood. We have to limit what we use of plastic. And even if we put it in the garbage, whatever we do. So what can we as individuals do to reduce the amount of plastic in our everyday life? If you should tell us, if I can get one or two things I can start tomorrow to do to start with, what is that? Is that to wrap off all the plastic in the shop and leave it for the shop to handle it, or what can we do? Yeah, who will start?
I'm not sure, but I think it's very difficult to be a responsible person in the shop, because often there are no alternatives. If we had alternatives, I think the producer responsibility would have been influencing more. But if you are buying frozen vegetables, they are in plastic, and you need to run between 4 or 5 different shops to find one that is not. So I think we need to, one of the major things we can do is to push towards legislations and rules that are going one step up in this pyramid compared to just the responsibility of our everyday life. Yeah. It's a boring answer, but
system level.
As a more systemic level, definitely.
Yeah, I would agree with this, but then of course, you can still do something. I mean, there's all these things like not using plastic bags, or and why buy or have always plastic bottles? I mean, you have a bottle that you can just refill.
I think you have to stop these plastic bottles.
Perfectly fine drinking water and all these things. But I think it's also the small habits, the small changes, the thinking through, like, do I need one more item of plastic? Do I need this? Anyway, the consumption in general should be reduced, and that includes plastic. So I think it's not just about plastic itself, but in general thinking through how much of whatever item do I actually need.
a general conscience about it. Yeah?
I think just like reduction in consumption in it, like generally, is one of the ways. And yeah, as you said, there are of course things we can do. I will encourage everyone to try to wash their fleece in a bucket next time. It's very interesting to see what color the top of that water have afterwards. Like it is obviously things we can do, but yeah.
I think I want to add that the issue is actually systemic. It's not like a plastic problem, and then you have climate change problem, and you have biodiversity problem. It's all linked, and it's linked to the economic system we have today, which is not accounting for the damage on the environment, which is plastic and climate change, whatever, and also humans. So the question is to address this root cause, not to think, okay, am I going to buy this plastic bottle or not? It helps. But we have also to, as a society, we have to think that we have exceeded the limit of how we function as a society, and we need to rethink how we produce and consume materials. We are really changing Earth. Like it's really dramatic how we are influencing life on Earth. So, yeah.
That's which actors have the power and the credibility to change the current situation? Is it the EU or is it the government?
There's not a single one.
No,
not a single one.
I mean, everyone needs to, in a way, be on board. And that starts, that it is the EU, but it's also the Norwegian government or, other governments in the world. Because in the end, we have to work together. There's so much trade happening as well that even if Norway changes something, how will that influence the rest of the world? And how will that influence if things can or are imported to Norway, for example? So there's not one actor. And I mean, it's really everyone. So it's starting from the highest level with governments, and it does go down to the consumer. Everyone has to make their contribution.
I think we will open up for hands in the audience. Is there anyone who wants to give a question? Yes?
Okay, I have a question.
You wait for the microphone.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm not an expert in this subject, obviously, but I know that there's a lot of cleanup that they're trying to do, for example, for the garbage patch in the Pacific, but that is mostly focused on larger pieces of plastic. Is there anything, because I have not heard of, is there anything that's trying to target microplastics, which is probably a pretty impossible thing to clean up?
More or less no. Yes, it is like locally in terms of washing machine filters, sewage water on the local scale, but I think we could say that for now it's lost when it's lost to the ocean or to rivers, definitely. And also for the garbage patch and like the ocean cleanup, I don't think I've met one researcher that is very positive towards this whole project, not because it is bad in itself, but because it costs huge amount of money, which could have been used on further up in the system to reduce the pollution. And
what no one is talking about is all the bycatch in this ocean cleanup. They're nets. You have a huge net that is essentially trawling and taking in the plastic. I mean, all the fish, all the turtles, all the sharks are in there. They're going on board too. If they're lucky, you can throw them back into the water, and otherwise not. So there is bycatch. And I mean, I don't say necessarily it's bad. It's good to get some plastic out of it, but there are trade-offs there as well. It would be interesting to look at that, actually.
I heard the leader of this, the ocean cleanup last week, and he told it as a very positive thing that it was just 0.7% by weight of bycatch. To me, that is huge because plastic is light, animals are heavy. So this is very complicated, but he got big investors on his side, Jeff Bezos and Musk, and it's a nice way of greenwashing big companies.
It's the same argument that technology can solve the plastic pollution crisis, which is maybe not. Yeah.
I think there's also, there's also this question of once you take it out of the environment, what do you do with it? Yeah. And I think the question will be even more complicated with microplastics because you can blow on it and then it will be everywhere again. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a question back here and then in the middle. Yep.
Thank you very much to all of you for interesting presentations. I'm really impressed about your research, and I realize that it's really relevant topics you are into. I have a question which could be addressed to any of you regarding what can Norway do, given that Norway, as a maritime country with a long coastal line, industries in oil and gas, in fish farming, using a lot of plastic, also fishing, and high-income country with consumption, which is very much using plastic. So my question is, what measures have most impact in solving this problem? Is it about changing lifestyles, as you have discussed already? Is it about fish farming, being more conscious about plastic, circulating plastic? Is it about also oil and gas, which gives input, the resources input to plastics, or any other measures? What do you think is most important to solve this problem?
I can answer, yeah. I already mentioned earlier, we have consumer packaging items, tires, fishing gear. These make up almost every single plastic that goes to the ocean or the environment from Norway. So we need to think about how to target these three sources. For example, if you come up with a policy that targets one thing, like bags, for example, you increase the price of it, that's not going to solve the issue. You have to think about something systemic. You have to think about how much plastic is involved or kind of embedded in products. We don't need plastics in all products. The issue is that plastic is very cheap, so it's widespread. It's everywhere. We have it in products that need plastic, but also products that don't need plastic. So we need to I'm not an economist, I'm not a politician or whatever, but I think we need to target these in many different ways. I don't know if we put a tax or, I don't know, ban something or this solution, I don't know. But we need to address these things. Microplastics from tires, consumer packaging or packaging in general, and fishing gear. These are the ones that kind of leak to the environment.
Yeah, I agree with this. And with the fishing gear, Norway is good in a way, because the fishing gear is lost also when fishing, but then fishermen can report it, and then the Fiskeridirektoratet, they have these crews every year, and they go and collect like reported fishing gear, and also for crabs and things. So that is, I think, a start. It's not solving the whole problem, of course, but that is at least a start. But of course, the issue is also, again, everything is connected. Even if Norway does something good, well, there's still stuff coming from elsewhere as well. So again, we have to have a systemic solution and not just quick fixes here and there. But I completely agree that these are the really three big drivers in Norway that we have to try and look at. But for tires, for example, it's like, well, how do we do this? There's also trade-offs there. Well, more public transport, more just bicycle instead of cars. All of that would already help. Then we have electric cars. That's great because there's less climate change, but they're heavier than other normal cars. So you have more microplastics. So all is connected. Then what do we want to solve? Is it climate change? Is it microplastics, or both together? So what's the best solution? And for this, I think we have to find the best solution and trade-offs.
I think what is a little bit sad is that the last government published this summary of knowledge, and they wanted to bring the governmental view further, and what should be the plastic strategy some years ago, and the knowledge was, as I read it, really good. They must have had good researchers on board, but what they were proposing as concrete changes were very weak. It was like some kind of extended producer responsibility, which I don't know how ended. Maybe you know better. And now, to me, we are like governmental-wise pushing the development of the UN Plastic Treaty in front of us, instead of also taking action with legislations and laws within our own country, which we can do. Yeah, it's not like we will be totally outcompeted in the salmon industry if we have some more guidelines or rules for how to handle the waste. Or, yeah, as you say, it's a lot of money in Norway. We could have had local legislations without always waiting for the UN level, which is, let's see what happens in some few months, but it's not promising right now. It's war. It's other things that are influencing this treaty development that is like out of the hands of UN environmentalists.
Would you like to comment?
Yes. Yeah? I also had a comment, a bit, I guess, in the same sense, but a lot of time when people ask what could be some of the solution that we could have, alternative materials are often cited, which come with their own kind of problems. But what would be interesting, for me at least, in the case of Norway, is to see how would, because those materials are very expensive compared to plastic, so how would Norway will be willing to invest in alternative materials that will concurrence oiling industries? So I think that's also like a bit of a debate in this country of seeing, are we willing to do a step forward for the environment, knowing that oiling industry is very important here in Norway?
Yeah. We open up for a question here.
I had one. Yeah. Sorry about that, but I sort of reacted on impulse, and now I lost it all. But anyway, thank you so much for. Do you hear me? Yes. I always love PhD students because they are systematics. They make models, and I don't think any one of us are able to solve this at all. I'll come back to that in 30 seconds. But make certain that your way of approaching it systematically reaches international research and then again international industry, where I sort of come from a long lifetime. And I appreciate very much the soil samples from Smøla, because I was a cheap farmer on Smøla when I retired from international industry, oil industry, gas industry. Randi Wenche has been on my farm for so many years, and we collected hundreds of kilos just in the small environment where we lived, actually. But the plastic is there. Micro plastics, the old breakdown, and I've been shuffling it, will be there and will probably stay there as part of our soil composition, whether on land or on the marine sediments. So we have to live with that. My sort of concern is when this starts going into our cells, our seeds, our eggs, in all living environments, and start creating, for instance, cancer, start creating what we call it, mutations. How do you as young people think about this? Are we creating new cancer sites, new sort of cell developments? I see all this as a catastrophe, 10 times more than the climatic change, because that influences 100% or 90% in my head human luxury. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that was a huge question.
No, it was an observation.
Observation, yeah. Who wants to start giving a comment?
I can maybe start.
Yeah.
Well, it's already there. So as we've seen in Jenny's presentation, everywhere we looked for microplastic, it's been there. Now, as far as my understanding goes, is that we don't fully understand what the impact of plastic in our tissues is. So we can imagine that the plastic in itself is already causing inflammations and irritation in different parts. But I think what is now very important to look at is plastic additives and plastic chemicals, which then could have higher impacts in, for example, hormonal impacts, which I'm not sure the plastic in itself as pure polymer could have.
Mm.
I must say I totally disagree when it comes to the climate change comparison, because that's fair. But I'm afraid of this comparison between the different natural crises, because that also leads money. It's very easy for us now in a couple of years to get money for our research, while I'm at a department where my climate change researchers really have troubles of getting funding because the media is pushing in some certain directions and not others. I'm not a mediciner, I'm not a cancer expert, I really don't know how severe it is, but we have had plastics for the last 70 years now. It's not like it's totally new. So I would personally, just for looking like over the field for some years, be more afraid of other chemicals, and like I think we have other exposure routes that is probably as severe as plastic. But I think that is divided within the community also how severe this is. So yeah.
But you said about all the chemicals and the toxic chemicals adding in the production of. But isn't that a case that could be regulated? Are the industry allowed to use? I think I read the figure of 15,000 of chemicals, and a lot of these chemicals we don't even know how the chemicals works, and not the cocktail together. Is that a field that we could ask for some regulations or authorities to start?
I can maybe answer. It's around 16,000 actually that were identified. And many of them are toxic. We know it's toxic, but they're still added. Many of them, we don't know their toxicity, but also some studies actually have tested some plastics in the environment, and they found out that there are additives or chemicals that we don't actually know. Like we don't have no idea what they are, and they're toxic, and they're all these problems. So that's something also I personally struggled in my PhD to get data for additives, because there's actually none. And the plastic industry is very much, I don't know how to say this, but they don't want to give data away. Like they don't want to give the secret mixture that they use. Or we have now a student working with plastic additives, and she's struggling to get all these data. So. Maybe we need regulations, and we need the government to push more to regulate this plastic industry, which is also linked to the oil and gas. And you have seen this in the plastic treaty. There is a big lobbying going right now that we don't need they don't want that regulations come in place. And yeah, it's a big issue, and we have been struggling with it. So yeah.
We are totally outcompeted when we are working as scientists in these plastic negotiations, because we don't have funding for going on events like this. We don't have time for it. It's like on top of everything else, while the plastic industry use this as a part of their time. And we are like outcompeted 1-3 or 1-4 in these meetings. So it's very hard. But here, coming back to what you said about Norway, here we are actually good in terms of really trying to push when it comes to this plastic treaty development. But what comes out of it, that's something else.
I can maybe add that there's actually great work from Martin Wagner here at NTNU that has started this very nice reports on plastic chemicals called PlastChem, which tries to compile different chemicals and their dangers and different things. So there is some work on it, but yes, it's complicated.
We have a few more. Now it's 2-3 hands here. We take the one after the other, please.
Yes, I have a question for Jakob. So you said that the plastic changes the soil properties. Could you elaborate on the impacts of these changes in the soil properties and discuss how they would compare with the impacts of actually trying to remove the plastic in the coastal lines? So good luck.
Yeah, what we see out there is that it is changing in terms of it becomes very porous. So when you reach a certain level, it becomes a lot of air, and it's like it's trapped, and it doesn't make the normal layers of soil, but you are having, how to say it, like when you make a pile of Lego, it's a lot of air in between the pile, and even though you are putting soil on top, it will be a lot of air within. But how that affects the biological communities down here, so far we know very little about it. It's obviously changing the water regime. That's quite clear. When I just you could go out there and pour water on different spots, and you will feel the same, even though you don't use the timer and a very specific setup. And what was the last? Yeah, compared to taking it out, I would say that. What should we do with it? It will be a mixture of special waste. Should we, how much CO2 would it be to burn it? Because it's organic, it's mineral organic, combined with plastic from the last 70 years. I don't see how we could treat this well. Probably there are ideas about filtering all the soil and leave it back. I'm very reluctant to that, because give it one winter storm without frost and the soil would just blow on shore. So this is and it's a bit like bioengineering in a way, and I don't have any good answers yet. But maybe in the most hotspot areas there should be removed, because it's not really soil. It's when you reach 70% of plastic, as I see some places, it's plastic with soil and not soil with plastic, and then maybe it's worth it. But also, you are really changing the area if you go in with huge digging machines, and you need supply boats from the oil industry to this is big. It's big scale if we are supposed to do something with it. I don't have a good answer. It's a classic wicked problem. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
But yeah, that's good. So that will be another more research and more. But we take another question now. Yep, please.
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for very good presentations. You are good communicators, all of you. I have one short comment and then two short questions, if I may. In the discussion with Bitten Gabi and Francesca on degradability, actually a couple of years ago, there was some literature discussing degradability of plastics. And the conclusion is to have it certified as being biodegradable, it just would have to stand a standard test. And that test is only about breaking it down into small particles, nothing more. A question first to Ahmed, because yesterday in the daily TV news, Dagsrevyen, one of your colleagues, Kim Rainer, presented the fact that in Norway, actually, even though a large share of the plastics for municipal waste is for recycling, more than 50% of that doesn't become recycled. So that indicates that we should do something very differently than what we are doing, even in Norway. Do you have any ideas on how we can solve that? I mean, dilemma? Instead of exporting plastic, so-called recycling, it ends up being burned or sent to China. And then a question to Jenny. I was curious when you informed about the way you are modeling. How do you validate a model like that? And without going on field trips, because you cannot do it by field trips. But how do you validate such a model? You said it's super complicated to do it on local coastal areas. But in principle, how do you validate such a model? Thank you.
Take the first question, Ahmed, and you can think about it, Jenny.
No, I have a very short answer, actually.
Oh, you have a very short answer? Yeah. Okay.
I get someone else to do the field work for me. So there are actually people going around and checking how much plastic there is on the coastline. There was Jakob was part of a project a few years ago with salt, where they actually did a very, I would say, very extensive mapping of the Norwegian coastline, just checking how much plastic did they find on the beaches. And I have access to that data, so I can use other people's fieldwork to validate my model.
Okay, good collaboration. Yeah. Okay, Ahmed, solving the dilemma with the plastic waste.
I think there are two issues we have to address before trying to give an answer to why recycling is not working well. I think the technology we use is mostly mechanical recycling, which shreds plastics and kind of tries to recycle it. And for many polymers, that doesn't work well because they have also a limit in how much you can break them down and then make a new plastic out of that. It's only effective for PET, for example. For PVC and other polymers, it's not working well. There is also the issue of contamination, that you get plastic, but you get also physical contamination, which is you have paper or whatever material, so it's hard to sort them out. That also affects recycling. You have the contamination, which is more chemical. You have kind of chemical substances that also affect recycling efficiency, but also creates another problem that more you recycle, you'll have more kind of accumulation of additives in the plastic cycle. So it's more problematic. To answer this question, I think we need to think about it in a different way. Why we design these products this way, and then how can we design them to be recycled in the first place? We should not use polymers or kind of chemicals that can also affect recycling. That's one thing. We need products that can be separated easily. That can help recycling. But I'm not. This is my personal opinion now. I'm answering. I'm not optimistic about recycling. I think there's a limitation when it comes to that, and we should not give hope to have 100% closed loop recycling. It's not maybe going to happen. We should focus on other solutions to manage this plastic material, or maybe not produce in the first place. We don't need it. So recycling, in short, is maybe not not as we expect it to be. There is a limit for technology. There is also chemical recycling, which there is new technology that maybe it has proven on a lab scale that can recycle down to the molecule and then kind of build up the plastic again. But I'm not sure. I'm not a recycling expert. So yeah. So that's my answer to that. Yeah.
More hands? Yeah. Please. Short questions is very good.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Babak. We were discussing digitalization and sustainability of digitalization here last night, and I see a kind of strange phenomena, because we were discussing like social media, like Facebook is polluting the world with surveillance, with data surveillance, and removes the dignity of the people, which you can analogy to this plastic thing. But there, what I observe is that Facebook is seen as the bad guy, and all the political. I mean, we expect from our politicians to stop Facebook, and this is what is happening. We have all this GDPR, we have all these political movements, and they want to stop this big tech and put them under control. But when we talk about environment like plastic, it becomes a privatized problem. It becomes people who go around with bottles and forget it on the beach, and it goes, so it's our fault as individuals. This would never happen with respect to Facebook. I mean, we are victims of Facebook, but we are not victims of those who create these bottles for us, which is very difficult. I mean, if you want to buy a bottle of water, it is always in plastic. So you have to either go be thirsty or buy a bottle with plastic. So why don't we blame those who make these bottles that you shouldn't put it in plastic, you should put it in something else? And if a politician does it, then the politician doesn't get elected again. It will be the last time. But it's the opposite when it comes to digitalization. If a politician doesn't protect the citizens, they don't get elected next time. So it's just an interesting phenomenon I observe, and I don't know if we have an answer for that, but maybe we can learn something from digitalization regulation that can be used in problems like this.
Yes, I can answer shortly. This tactic is not new, actually. It's not only for plastic. It has been done for the climate change with carbon footprint. The oil and gas industry kind of tries to blame you as consumers or as people that you're the issue of is causing climate change or plastic pollution. And we keep producing plastic, which is cheap. And then, by the way, plastic is a byproduct of oil and gas. So it's kind of, they found this material that we can produce oil and gas, but also produce this byproduct, which is plastic, and now it's everywhere. So it's not your issue. I don't think it's an issue of consumers as much as it's systemic. I mean, I don't blame people for buying. You can also reduce plastic consumption, but it's really systemic. You can go to the supermarket and look at the products you see. Plastic is everywhere. You cannot control it. So it's not something new. It has been done before in the past. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's not everyone need to comment, but if someone want to comment, you're welcome.
No, I can only echo what Ahmed says, but again, I mean, I think everyone just needs to also chip in, because again, yes, you have to buy a plastic bottle with water if you want to have water, but again, in Norway, why do we even buy a plastic bottle, you know? I mean, it would be so easy to just take the plastic bottle from yesterday or just a bottle that you have at home. And I think it's these kind of things that the consumer can make a difference, actually. But it doesn't mean that the consumer is the only one that should make a difference. So, I mean, very definitely there have to be rules and legislations, and there have to be sort of other kind of solutions. But we should also not forget there's always trade-offs with something else. So, I mean, if now all the water starts being sold in glass bottles, that's just a lot more weight that is being transported around if the transport routes stay the same. So it's not just as simple as just exchanging something for something else. And also there, like plastic, we just use too much, but some of the things are actually good. I mean, some of the plastic for like packaging, food production, helps prevent food waste, which again is an impact. Not all of it, though. A lot of it is completely unnecessary, but some of it. So it's also not, it's too easy to just blame all plastic. You know, we have to be a bit more differentiated in what we actually do as well, both as consumers and then as the big companies.
Can I comment? I believe plastic is a fantastic material. I'm not saying it's bad, ban it. No, I think it's fantastic, but we need also to be smart for how to manage it or use it and so on. Yeah.
I totally agree with everything. But I find the observation very valid in a way. It makes sense, but at the same time, we are also part of a democracy. So if we should go one step further, we are all victims of who is leading our countries. And that is also a part of this.
Mm. Are there more hands? Yeah, please.
I just have questions about the cleanup. We have learned a lot about picking plastics on the coast, where it's accumulated in the beaches. But we have also learned about the huge areas in the oceans of plastics. What about the potential for collecting these from vessels? I think some years ago there was an initiative, a plan by Røkke to do something, but I haven't heard any more about that. What's the potential for this?
I think his boat never came ashore so far. I think that's the answer for Røkke. For the ocean cleanup, do you mean the micro or the macro? Or both? For the macro, I think the economy is the biggest problem. It is possible. The ocean cleanup shows that they are able to clean up, and they have plans for cleaning up 80% of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch within, is it 2050 or 2060? but the latest prediction of money was 7 billion euros. And then it's like, when he presented, when I was there, he just compared to how this would affect biota, like we discussed, but he didn't compare to what this money could have been used for in other parts of the system of the plastic, from production to endpoint. So it is possible for the macro part, but the problem is how much petrol fuel and how many ships and how much biota is going into this whole industrial system, and how much money that could have been used for something else, as I see it. I don't know.
No, I agree. I completely agree. I mean, it's running. They're also pretty good at promoting it. And I think, like, well, that can be definitely part of a solution, but it's not the solution, definitely not.
I think the best they have done is to move over to rivers, because that's at least one step further up in the chain. It's at least before it reaches the oceans. And they are working on the rivers. I believe more in that part of their project. But that's also bycatch, definitely.
You have another question? We take a last. Okay, two last questions here. The last one there. Yeah, please.
Hi, thanks. So as far as I know, some 550 or 500,000 tons per year is consumed of plastics, and 400,000 tons in Norway is built into buildings. And when we talk to waste collectors, they say that they are compensated for the post-consumer plastics only for collecting it. But if they are investing it, taking it out of their waste streams instead of sending it to Sweden for burning, they lose money. How do you think extended producer responsibility could be used as a tool to increase recycling?
I'll look that up.
Yes, it can help to some extent to get the plastic to recycling. But again, the question is, do you have the plastic that is easy to recycle? Is it going to be recycled or not? That's good. I mean, it's good to have also kind of an idea of what you get as a sector, or in buildings, what we put in buildings, and when do we expect these are going to come out as waste? Because in buildings, especially, plastics take a long time, up to 80 years, that they will stay in buildings, and then they will come out after a while. So what we get now from buildings are actually very old plastics. So they may be, if we put now some regulations for buildings or cars or these products that have long lifetime, we won't see it now. It's going to be in the future that we will see an effect. Especially if you kind of think about designing products or plastics that are easy to recycle, don't have additives, and are easy to sort. That would be my answer. Yeah.
Okay, the last question here.
So I'm the lucky guy with the last question. By the way, $7 billion.
7 billion euros.
Euros, yeah, more or less as dollars. That's less than 1 week of war.
But the problem is that money doesn't go from war to environmental issues. Exactly. If you solve that one, you...
So the question, like dealing with war and dealing with plastics, is two kinds of wars of enormous complexity, right? You are studying something of enormous complexity, and each of your PhD works is kind of a tiny little fragment within a big problem. And you cannot do more than your tiny little fragment. The question is, what do you do as PhD students in order to maximize your motivation for some political impact of what you're doing?
I don't think they are separated. War and plastic pollution and climate change and biodiversity loss and all of these are caused by the same issue. If I'm going to be honest, it's caused by the capitalistic nature of the economy, and also the way the world has been framed the last 500 years. It's the same. I mean, it doesn't change. After the Second World War, it continued. We have the same system that is more about extraction, colonization, imperialism, and so on, which is also part of the plastic pollution issue. We produce waste here, we send it to another country. They can manage it. But then this issue is also gonna bite us back here in terms of plastic coming back or climate change. So I don't think they're separate. I personally think they're both connected, the same thing. I don't think we should find solutions that are more separated. We should communicate more with each other. I think, yeah.
Yeah. Some others would give a short comment.
You asked for motivation in the end. To me, I'm motivated like science communication, like this, working with school classes, working with the plastic deal now towards the last UN meeting, outreach, use of the knowledge more than just in my office or in the lab. That's my personal answer.
Yeah. Nice to hear. Yeah. Yeah, Gabrielle?
I guess I could speak for myself, but I guess as a biologist, I also really enjoy the fact that I get to see a bit how nature is able to adapt and how it's like the power of nature transformation to the different challenges we throw at it. So I think that's very interesting for me, and although it's a very catastrophic issue, there's still some beauty in that way in it, for me at least.
Mm-hmm. Jenny, what's motivating you?
It's a difficult question because I don't really know. I mean, I was never motivated by the idea of contributing to political change in that way, because I'm working on the very technical part and not so much on the. It's kind of removed from society in a way. So, yeah, my motivation has never been really attached to that. I'm not sure exactly what it came from. I just really enjoy working on this. So regardless of the effect it has on this problem in the long term, that doesn't really affect my motivation, because I just think it's a really fun project that I was really motivated to work on.
It's just a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a fun challenge, yeah.
Yeah. I will now, before we round up this evening, I will give you one question, and this you have just to answer very brief, and that is imagination. If tomorrow you have the opportunity to decide one measure, one thing to do that you want to be done, and you can there's no resistance, everything is open. What would that one thing be that you could put into impact, seen from with the glasses that you are having now and working where you are? If you could put one thing into action, what would that be?
For plastic
yeah,
issue.
for this topic.
It's hard to choose one. Maybe if it's technical, I would like to see more regulations to address the issues we have directly. But if I would say more of a big picture, I think a change in how we function as a society, or a global society of the capitalistic nature, maybe reduce that a bit. That's my answer. Yeah.
System change.
Yeah, systemic change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't disagree. But if I should choose one, a global, quite high plastic tax. Because one of the issues now is that it's too durable, it's too cheap, and it's too good. And that combination makes it very hard to change. So if it were more expensive, other alternatives would
too cheap to destroy the world.
Yeah.
I guess I would say that I would want the income from that tax to be put back into research on plastic pollution.
Yeah. Francesca?
I mean, one thing will clearly not be enough, but I think one thing that I would say is in general that people have to reduce, or they will reduce their consumption. If everyone will just do what I say, everyone will reduce their consumption, which would contribute to the plastic problem, but many other problems at the same time.
Gabrielle?
It's quite difficult to come last for that one. But yeah, I guess having more responsibility where responsibility is due, not only at the consumer level, but also at the different levels of this systematic problem, and more broadly just working with nature and not against it, I guess.
So our attitudes, our values, the way we are thinking, the mindset we do have by now. Yeah. Okay, we didn't solve all problems tonight, but I hope and think that we all have become a bit more knowledge, and hopefully also this will create some reflection. At least I feel I will have a lot to reflect on after this this evening. And I would say thank you to all of you, that I know you have worked hard and you have been in a program of coaching and learning skills of how to present, how to communicate, and congratulations with a very good participation here tonight, and to Francesca, the leader of this research group. And thank you to the audience, the audience we have in the live stream. I hope you have enjoyed the evening. Thank you.